Hey everybody, we are live with Genesis Office Hours episode number 27, broadcasting live from Texas and California today. How you doing, Chris?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing just fine, thank you. At the top of the show, I want to mention our two benevolent sponsors, of which Mr. Lima is one of them. So Chris Lima, thank you for sponsoring this episode. And then we also have Ryan Sullivan over at WP Site Care, doers of all the maintenance and awesome customer service on the web. So check them out at wpsitecare.com. If you're just tuning in, there are several ways you can participate. Well, you know what? I lied. It's not several ways. There is a way to participate, and that is to hop on Twitter and use the hashtag GOH chat if you want to send in your questions, which I know y'all are going to have some questions because I've got Chris Lima on. And Chris, I just imagine that you just open your mouth and just wisdom flows. You don't even have to move your lips.
It's not true, but I will tell you that I have a secret for how I get all that wisdom. And I'm willing to share it with just your audience as long as they don't share it with anyone else.
Okay, don't tweet this part, people.
Yeah, okay, so this is private just for us, right? You have to make a ton of mistakes, and if you're willing to make a good 10 years worth of mistakes, maybe 15 years worth, then you start getting to that place where you can be like, oh, yeah, I did that. Let me tell you a story of how that worked out. And people are like, oh, you just saved me. And you're like, yes, because I went through it the hard way, right? So I love the fact that the WordPress community and the Genesis community specifically are very committed to helping one another. So all you have to do is get out there, make a ton of mistakes, and then wisdom will flow out of your mouth without your lips even moving.
Wow, there you have it. Man, I've got some more mistakes on the way to make then. So Chris, we're 27 episodes into Genesis Office Hours, and today is our first book club episode. So, of course, as you know, we read your book, The Price is Right, talking about pricing products, and you dabble a little bit into services in there. But it's something new for our crowd to read a book and then get on here and discuss it with the author. And I feel like I'm maybe setting the bar too high for myself in the future because I don't know that I could always get a book author on the book club edition. So awesome.
You just have to pick which books you read very specifically.
Yes, I'm going to. I don't know, maybe read a Bob Dunn book next or something.
So tell Bob right now, Bob, get out there, start writing that book because then I can interview you. Yeah.
And so for the next time, hopefully I'll get to do some more book club editions on here. So if you go to the carrydills.com and the page where this podcast is being aired right now, and just leave a comment if you have a book that you would like to see on a future episode, and we'll put that to a vote later on.
The other shameless plug I'd make, if you read the book, if you're part of the book now, we both know, right? There are members of your book club that didn't read the book, right? And that's just the nature of book clubs is, you know, there's people who read the book, then there's people who read the book like the first day, and then for 30 days more they read 6 other books, they can't remember the book they read, and then there's a group that didn't read it. But if you did read it, regardless of whether you thought it was brilliant or trash, if you headed over to Amazon in whatever country you're in and found the book online and wrote a review there, I would love that. I would appreciate that. That would be fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you for bringing that up. That would be a great way that you could show a little love for Chris, or your 1 star, if that's, who knows. Just kidding. So I love book clubs in real life, and my husband says that it's just an excuse for me to get with my friends and drink wine. But, you know, we do actually have legitimate book discussions. So without further ado, Chris, let's talk about The Price is Right.
Sure.
So for those who are tuning in and didn't finish their homework of reading the book, The Price is Right, basically it's a short 1-hour read, so it's not too late. Still go pick up a copy and read it if you haven't. That just gives a lot of practical examples in sort of everyday situations to get you thinking about prices, specifically in terms of how you price products. So Chris, for you, like was this book written in answer to just kind of common questions you were getting, or what was the impetus to actually put pen to paper?
Yeah, so part of what happened was, I mean, I started pricing stuff 15 years ago in 1999. Just a natural part of being on an executive team with a hosted product that was in the cloud, and we were trying to figure out, what do we price this at? And we realized, we're looking around the table, and we're developers and marketers and support people, and and the CEO, and we're sitting in a room with the smartest people that we know, and everyone's like, I don't know. How do you price? Like, one of us must know, and no one knew, right? So we do what people did in those days. We went to Barnes and Noble, and we started looking for pricing. And some people went online, and what we found was there was one handbook on pricing, right? It was like 600 pages, and I read all 600 pages. It was the most boring 600 pages ever, and so these days there's a smaller one. There's a textbook that's about 250 pages, which is also brilliant work, but it's really complicated, right? And so I just felt like, wow, I'm in enough conversations. I'm answering some of the same questions over and over. I'm telling some of the same stories over and over. At some point, it makes sense to put these down into an introduction. Not that it's the end all of all pricing discussions, but it'll just give some people some basics to think through, some terms to understand. If I jump straight into price elasticity and they're like, I don't know what that means, right? But you go, let me back up and just tell you a story, right, of how this works, or how this works over here, or segmentation, right? The number of people I coach who fundamentally don't understand segmentation, and therefore don't understand how price points make sense within different segments, just meant that a work like this, I needed to have one so that I could pass it on to someone and say, read this, and then we'll talk next week. And so that's how it came. That's the genesis of the book.
That was a fantastic tie-in with Genesis Office Hours. Thank you for that, ladies and gentlemen. Apparently there's a new feature on Google Hangouts where there's like an applause button. So if you just want to just hit that at any point for Mr. Lemma, that would be entertaining. So you mentioned segmentation. Let's talk about that for a second. And you'll have to forgive me because I've been immersing myself in so many things about value pricing that I forget. I didn't have my slides with me, so I forget what my sources are. But the idea behind segmentation is that you're niching down your ideal customer very specifically. Not every customer is for me. I don't want every customer.
So segmentation does that without question. Segmentation allows you to say not just what's the available market, but what's the addressable market. What am I going to focus on? So segmentation allows you to say, I'm going to segment the market this way, and I'm going to focus on this. But segmentation also functions in that addressable market. If you have an addressable market that you say, I'm going to help people here, there are still segments in that space. And Genesis developers and designers know this very well. If you say, all I'm going to do is work with WordPress, customers, and then you say, I'm only going to work with people who use Genesis inside of WordPress, and then you say, okay, I've segmented, I've niched down, I got a small set, but then you meet a lawyer who wants a Genesis website, and he wants a custom site, and that's one segment, and then you have someone who's like, I just need to do something for my PTA group, and I just need to take a pre-done theme, drop it in, put some content, move on. That's a different segment. And how you think about pricing in those two different segments, even though you're still in one addressable market, even though that's one segment, in the segment, there's still ways to use segmentation to change the way you price. There's a pricing algorithm or a pricing approach that makes sense to each segment. You mentioned value-based pricing. Value-based pricing makes sense. It's one tool. Segmentation is a tool. Anchoring is a tool. All the different things we cover in the book are different tools. How you think about things. But most people think, once I've niched down to an addressable market, I'll treat everybody in the market the same. And it's not true. I talked to my lawyer friend. He says, look, I'm using this pre-done theme, and I'm tweaking it all the time. But if you were to get me a lawyer-specific Genesis child theme, I'd pay $1,000, right? Well, that guy at $1,000 is in a very different segment than the person who's like, I don't know if I want to spend $150, right? Different segments, drive different kind of pricing, different value, and different kind of assistance in the midst of it all.
Anchor it. By the way, if you've got questions on segmentation or really anything, go ahead and shoot that over on Twitter to GOH chat. Chris, I had the perfect example of price anchoring this week. And if you're not, for people who aren't familiar with that term, basically anchoring is it's a number that's out there. Actually, Chris, will you tell the story real quick on the study that was done?
Sure. Okay. So it's the official term is it says it's totally arbitrary, and yet there's a coherence or there's a connection there. And so and this book was written in Predictably Irrational, I think, the research, but it was MIT students, right? So these are smart folks, and they were brought into a room, and you could do this at home if you like. You write down the last 2 digits of your social security number in the upper right-hand corner of a paper. Now, just so we're clear, totally arbitrary numbers. Every student in that room had different numbers, completely unrelated. And then the proctor of the exam gave them 20 items and asked them to answer one question first. And the question was simply, would you buy this item for the number on the top right of your paper? Now, everyone has a different number, so they're being asked different questions about, what they'd buy it for, $29 or, $89 or what have you. Now, these items range, right? Microwave, toaster, bouncy ball, whatever, right? And so you go back and you're like, yes, no, yes, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. That wasn't the interesting part of the experiment, though you could use that data to discover interesting things. What was interesting was the second part of the question, which was, either way, whether you would or wouldn't buy it for that number, what would you buy it for? Please write that number down, right? Any number you want. And what they discovered was a high correlation between those people who had higher numbers, the last 2 digits of the social security number were higher, they estimated all the objects at a higher value than all the people that had lower numbers. So if your number ended in 14 and someone else ended their number with 89, the person with 89 on average put more expense or said, I'm willing to buy this for more than the person with 14. And you go, but that doesn't make any sense. There's absolutely no reason for it. And yet, over and over, we've seen, even if you tell someone, even if you say, we're about to walk into the store right now, and in fact, you can do this with your friends. The next time you go to Mexico and you're going to go shopping, you get off the cruise ship or you're just visiting a resort, and they take you in a bus to the special shopping place. And the guide who is on the bus tells you, hey, just so we're clear, you're going to go in there, there's going to be a lot of sales, right? But just be aware, right? Some of these deals aren't deals. And you're like, okay, they just told me. They just said it. And you're like, okay. You walk in and it says, normally $120. And then in smaller font underneath it, it says, on sale now, right? $28. And because of that first number, right, which anchors you to a higher dynamic, the lower price gives you a deal. And in fact, research suggests that if you can do the math between those two easier, you will feel like it's a bigger savings than if it's worse. So if you said, okay, it used to be 127 and now it's 19, no one can do that math. So that deal doesn't look very good. But if you said it used to be 120 and now it's 20, everybody can do that math. That feels like a big savings. Either way, you were just told 3 minutes ago in the bus, hey, just so you're clear, these deals may not be great deals. But you look at this, you've been warned, and it still works. It still pushes a button, and that button in the back of your brain is like, deal, sale, special. You start looking at whoever you're with, and you're like, I kind of like this one. And you notice you never say, this looks like a really good deal. You say, I've been looking for a watch that looks just like this, right? Because we make emotional decisions and then wrap it in some twisted logic that we like to convince ourselves that, we're being very rational about things when in fact it's arbitrary coherence.
I'm going to think about that next time I go shopping. Arbitrary coherence. Well, the example I've found myself in this week, I was looking to order speaker gifts for WordCamp DFW. And we're inside of that 1 month window, so anything that requires a customization, of course, we're just pushing that deadline a little bit. So I gotten some quotes from people, and due to the associated rush charge, all the numbers were way up here, and it was way outside of what I had intended to spend. But I was like, I want to do this. I have the budget. Let's, I'm going to make this happen. So I had another vendor come back to me with a price that was literally 50% of all these other prices, and which is actually more expensive than I originally intended to spend. But because it seemed like such a freaking great deal, I signed my name on the dotted line. And you give the example too of MSRP on a car or those sorts of things. That price anchoring is really who knew? Now I know there's a word for it.
Yeah, and it happens to me too, right? I go into a store. I love watches, right? This is a very, very bad habit to get into, because you go from a $30 watch to a $300 watch to a $3,000 watch, and you just keep stepping your game up. But you go into the store, and you go into a fancy store, and all the watches are like 10 and 15,000. I mean, like, you don't even know what's in them that makes them worth that much, but the clock engines inside them are fancy, and then you're like, I could never spend that much money up. But look, here's a really good deal, at 3,000, and you're like, wait, did I just say 3,000 in a watch? Like, that's insane, right? No one, you're in a store with $10,000 watches, right? So I think it's Dan who says, right, the best place to sell a $3,000 watch is next to a $15,000 watch, right? And you're like, well, yeah, duh.
All about context.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of the listeners are bringing up some interesting points that I want to talk about. And in the book, you mention the idea of a price bump or people's threshold for paying for products. And you give the example of going to the movies, and if I can still pull out, when it was $5, that was fantastic, and $7, $9, that's getting kind of pricey, but I can still pull out a $10 bill or 20 if I'm taking a date, and it's I don't have to pull out that extra, $21. So can you talk a little bit about not just the psychology behind that price bump, but how for Genesis folks, some of us are selling products, but most of us are probably more selling services. How does that price bump translate into the consulting industry?
Right. Okay, that's a great question. So the thing to make sure everybody understands is that there is such a thing as a price bump, and you have to understand what that is and where it sits, right? So anytime you cross it, even by a single dollar, and you will see a drop in sales. When you run up to it, up until you hit that bump, more often than not, there's no discernible drop in sales, right? And that's when we talk about you start talking about how you can quickly and easily move your price. Say that you're selling a service, and you're selling a service at a fixed rate, right? So you sell the service at $2,200 for a website, right? And so you say, okay, you pick the Genesis theme, and I'll go in, or child theme, and I'll go in and I'll adjust it. I'll tweak it for your business and do this, that, and I charge $2,200. And someone else comes along and they say, I think you charge more for that, right? And so you charge $2,300 and nothing changes. $2,400, nothing changes. You get $2,499, nothing changes. And then you cross $2,500. And I'm making this up. $2,500 may or may not be where the bump is. But the moment you cross $2,500 and you're like $2,600, and things drop, right? And you go, I think I just experienced the bump. Like I think I just found it, right? Which brings us back to the core of, you want to regularly be testing. You want to find where that line is, and you don't have to do all the testing yourself, right? I mean, the truth is, in a community of practitioners that are doing similar stuff, you can start asking questions about, and you want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples, but you can start asking the questions about, where are you seeing the bump? But this brings us all the way back to segmentation, because it doesn't do any good for one person to say, oh, the bump's at 500. The bump's at 500. Like, don't go past 500. And you're like, I don't start, until 2,000, and the price for me, price is at 2,500. And the next person says, I don't start until 5,000, and the price for us is 15,000. And you're like, oh, wait a second. I think what we're experiencing is we're in different segments, right, of the market, different audiences. They have different price bumps. So the first thing to understand is that it exists. The second thing to understand is it's contextual to a segment. And the third thing to understand is if you have multiple practitioners in that segment, then you can start sharing information to say, not that we want to kind of gameplay this to say let's all move up to the bump, but you can ask, what are you experiencing, right, in your group, to say, what are you seeing? What's changing for you? And invariably, you'll find someone who tried to push it too far and they backed up a little. Those are the people you want to find out where was that line, right? Because then you can move to that line without seeing a discernible drop in sales.
Yeah, I've noticed that as I've experimented with my own pricing over the last couple of years, and I definitely I hit that bump, but what it simultaneously did was help segment my customer base a little bit. It is. Are you there? I think we're having some issues on.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
So by all means, right? By all means, you want to know where that line is. The other thing to note is one of the ways you jump between segments, which I know we hadn't talked about yet. But if you're in a segment where that bump comes too quickly and you're like, I don't like this, I want to go past it. The thing to understand is that you can step to the next level. You just got to bring a different kind of value to it, right? No one wants to see you raise your prices arbitrarily without delivering anything more of value, right? And that's where you want to start understanding, in the new segment I'm stepping into, in that segment, what's the value? Where's the value creation, and what do they value it for, so I can figure it out. Does that make sense? Hey, are you there?
There we go.
Did you catch what I said?
Sorry about that.
So
Dang, I couldn't afford to miss.
So that's the only time I'm ever going to say that.
Okay, I'm hoping the replay caught that bit. Dang it!
All I was saying is you can move, if that bump comes too quickly, you can move to the next, into the next realm. You can move to the next bump, but you're crossing into a new segment. You need to make sure you're delivering the right value for that segment, and that's where you really start thinking through. I'm going into a new segment. That's a new group of people. What do they value? How do they value it? It's not just about raising your rates for the sake of raising your rates. You want to deliver greater value for that new rate, right?
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I guess the term value pricing, I've maybe only been exposed to it for a year or so, and you were probably actually where I first heard it from. And my first gut reaction to it was, it just doesn't feel right, like it just seems arbitrary.
Yeah, you disappeared for a second, but you're back.
And with this connectivity today. Anyhow, I was leery of value pricing and just arbitrarily sticking a higher dollar amount on something just because I can. But as I've learned more and sort of immersed myself in the study of it, you're spot on that it's about figuring out how to add more value to a client. So I can't go so far as to say that, just a regularly hourly rate is selfish, but I'm thinking about how much money I can earn off of an hour of work, as opposed to what value can I deliver for my customer.
So the thing to understand for people is that ultimately price is never about money, right? And it's not just about money. And this is where people get very confused, because they think the price shows an amount of money. Yes, the price shows an amount of money, but price is not about money. Price is a trade. Price is a trade that says, I'm willing to deliver this amount of cash for something. And it's not always just a trade between my cash and your service, right? It's about value. It's about time, right? If I can pay you and free up my time, then I'm not even caring about you, right? So we have a babysitter, right? I pay that babysitter about double the going rate for her hourly rate to watch our kids. And she's like, that's way more than I get from anyone else. I'm like, yeah, because they're valuing you. I don't value you. You know what I value? I value being able to walk out of this house and never think about you and never think about my kids. It's the value of my date with my wife that I'm pricing. And because I know that you may not be able to solve everything, I also know that you can call your mom and I don't have to think about it because you're not going to call me. So, I mean, unless it's a big emergency. And so I'm pricing my time. I'm not pricing her time. I'm pricing my value, not her value. When she understands that, she can shift to value-based pricing and even tell the rest of her customers, what you're paying me for is so you can go out and never worry about your kids again. What's that worth? And they're like, yeah, okay, you're right, right? So sometimes it's value, sometimes it's about time, sometimes it's about energy, right? How much am I going to have to do blah, 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 blah? And you're like, you know what? I'm just going to pay you so I don't have to burn that energy. Right? A lot of written work, a lot of analysis work comes at from that perspective where you're like, I don't want to spend that kind of energy on figuring that out. You just tell me what it is and I'll just go from there and I'll pay you for it. Or savings, right? So if I'm going to save money by spending some money, then by all means I want to do it. So when people hire me to coach, on average, I mean, you can get me on you for $400 an hour, but my average coaching, I have 3 different plans, but on average it's about $750 an hour. You're like, that's a lot of money per hour. Well, I never price it per hour, by the way. I price it per month. But the other dynamic of it is, it's not in that moment, it's about all the money I'm going to save you. So I prefer that you go screw up your whole business. I prefer that you tank it. I prefer that you declare bankruptcy 6 times over. I prefer that your products don't sell. By the time you show up to me and I walk you through those issues and how you could have solved them, at that point you're like, I'm making a small investment in protecting myself from losing everything at this time, right? So, an entrepreneur or a small company starts growing and they go, I don't want to lose this. I'm like, okay. So now you're paying for savings, right? So value, time, energy, savings, all of those things are trade-offs against money. That's what the price represents, not just the money that's getting handed over.
Once again, you open your mouth and wisdom flows. My husband likes to call that opportunity cost. And his reasoning, and I really just think it's his way of getting out of taking care of lawn work, but that he can hire someone to do that task while he's at work making more money than he's paying for that task to be done.
So my wife and I celebrated 10 years of marriage this year, right? Just a month ago. And she's fantastic, but I want to say this. We almost never fight. And the reason we don't fight is because I have completely paid other people to solve the things we would fight about. We would fight about 2 things, right? I love to have people over, right? I'm very hospitality oriented, so every weekend we have people, or I would love to have people over. But that means the house has to be cleaned every week. Now, when I was single, it didn't need to, that was not a requirement. I could have people over, and it didn't matter if there was dirt in the corner under the couch. My wife, when we were dating, said, there's no way we're going to host people at your house. This house is a mess. And I said, it's fine. I went upstairs to take a shower. When I came down, she had swept the whole ground floor into one pile of dirt that was about 1.5 feet high right in front of the foot of the stairs. And I'm like, what is that? And she said, well, that's what was in your house, right? I'm like, well, that's unfair because she went under couches. She went in corners. Nobody ever saw that. But the truth is, if I wanted to bring people over every week, we would have a fight about cleaning the house and is the house ready. So I pay someone every week to come clean our house, top to bottom. And my wife and I don't fight about that. And we don't fight about anyone coming over on the weekends. The other thing we would fight about, right, is the bills. Bills, like, did you go to the mailbox yet? I need the list of bills. I'll pay them. We have the money. I just need to pay them. If we don't pay them, they're going to come and take our stuff. Like, nobody wants that. And you don't want to fight about where's the bills or have you checked the mail. All of our bills go to another address in South Dakota, right? There's a service we pay. Everything gets routed there. They open them, scan them, digitize them, put them into a system, send me an email. I can pay them online, and we don't have any more fights. The sum total that I spend on all of that is about $400 a month. For $400 a month, I have protected our marriage and given us 10 years. Because I guarantee you, if we were fighting every week, she would leave me. I'm not worth it, right? She would just bolt. But for $400, So you're like, what are you paying for? Are you paying for cleaning service? Are you paying for someone to open an email or open a letter and scan it? Or are you paying for the safety and sanctity of having a mate for the rest of your life? $400 is cheap, right? It's all about that trade-off and that value. If they call me and say, hey, your bill pay service is now going to go from $10 to $20, I'm not going to care, right? I hope they're not watching your show, but really, I'm not going to care.
You've just given some great marriage advice here on Genesis Office Hours, and I'm totally making my husband watch this episode. Jackie has a question. You talk about pricing, penetration pricing, and competitive pricing. And Jackie's question is: would finding a niche expertise in WordPress, in the context of WordPress, help you move more into the premium pricing, as opposed to probably competitive where you're starting out?
Yeah. So I mean, people. I say this all the time when we talk about value-based pricing. People don't know what value is, right? We don't run with an automated calculator in our head going, "That's worth 27. That's worth 39. That's worth 150." Because we don't have that calculator, it's very difficult. And so most people, especially when you have a whole bunch of competitors in the space, most people will just say, I'm going to look left, I'm going to look right, I'm going to price it the way everyone else prices it, right? Now, here's the thing that's really interesting, right? There was research done at London Business School, and what they did was they took objects that were very, very similar, right, and they put them into the mix. And in one set, they put only 5 items. In another set, they put 20 or 30 items that were roughly the same. It's the equivalent of looking at the number of different cheeses at the supermarket versus the number of different sodas at the supermarket. One has significantly more options than another. But okay, you're looking at these two things, and then they say, now what we want to know is, can we price different and have people pay? And what you discover is when there's more competition, the premium price, actually people will pay a lot less for the poor quality, and they will pay a lot more for the high quality. So people were willing to pay up to 40% more for premium products in a highly competitive space, because there's something about quality amidst competition, right? When you have a lot of players, there's something about picking the quality one that lets you jump up from the riffraff, right? So you say, look, every plugin out there that does X, Y, Z, they're all 39. I'm going to charge 139, right? And, well, I don't know if you do that, but, you put it way above, and all of a sudden people go, because of the way they work, well, I'm assuming I'm making a trade-off here for quality. And in fact, what LBS highlighted was that people will choose that way, right? That they will choose for it. Not everyone, but a segment of people will do that. So if you're going to step into a highly competitive space, then by all means, I'd say look for what are the quality markers or the quality indicators in that space that allow you to push your price up. The challenge in that space, and the challenge when you talk about competitive strategy on price, is that if you do something, likely everybody else would do something, and whether it's on the service side or it's in the feature and pricing side, you may end up incurring more cost, right? So you want to really evaluate what you're doing. I tell the story of banks in the early days where banks were only open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and everyone on Main Street, right? 4 banks on Main Street, and they were all open the same hours. And then one decided we're going to open at 8 a.m. And so they got 20% churn to show up at their bank. They're like, woo! The next one said open up. Then they all started opening up at 8, right? And eventually some moved over, but then one said we're going to stay open till 8. And then one said we're going to open up half days on Saturday. One said we're going to open up full day on Saturday. And the other one said half day on Sunday. When it was all done, they were all equal, but all they had ended up doing after all that churn back and forth was increase their internal cost of operations. Nothing else had changed. They hadn't grown the market. They'd swapped customers back and forth, but all they had done is increase their cost. So if you say, oh, I'm going to charge more, but I'm going to add all this service, and that service has a high cost to you, and the next person says, I'm going to charge more too because everyone else is charging more, and they don't add cost, you're the one that incurs the cost for making that move. So you need to think through a lot of the angles on this before you start making that move. But yeah, by all means, any kind of premium indicators, any kind of premium markers will allow you to push your price up in a competitive space. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, it did for me. Jackie, feel free to throw a follow-up on there. We've got a question from John, and he wants to know your take on the freemium model and how do you best decide what the premium, if you're using a freemium model, how do you decide what falls under the premium or paid?
Right. So I think at the end of the day, the freemium model has shifted dramatically since it first started, right? The initial freemium, I think at the end of the day, that initial freemium model has been subsidized by venture capital, so they can offer a whole bunch of free several rounds until they go and monetize. And that, for other businesses that don't have that kind of funding, quickly discover this isn't working. Like I'm not generating high enough conversion to generate the revenue to fund the support costs of my freemium model. So, I mean, you have to look at your own metrics to see if that makes sense. We've seen modifications to freemium, and those have kind of worked, but in general, I'm not a huge fan. The research suggests, and there were two different studies that were looking at membership sites that started as free, and then they added a component that caused them to change their pricing to $1. Now, this was $1 a year. That's not a lot of money, right? And they lost, the two different studies lost between 15 and 30% of the traffic, right? That suggests that between 15 to 30% of your base rather do that up front and find that out and get rid of that tax on my business at the very beginning than to wait till later. So for me, I tell people start pricing right away. Now, that said, one of the interesting freemium angles is it starts at pricing but a lower price and pushes into a higher price because it's trying to go after a different market. So you look at Dropbox, a company called Zobni that did stuff in your inbox. You look at, there's another one I'm thinking of, but I'm blanking on the name. But all three of those, what they did was they were going after, they wanted to go after an enterprise market, and they started in the regular consumer market. But what they drove was, if enough people use Zobni, if enough people use Dropbox, and they had the same commercial or corporate address, they would go in and sell them a very different license for the corporate stuff, and that license would be several, a factor of several multiplication factors of the cost of the consumer, right? So you might pay $3 a month for Zobni, or actually Zobni I think was $30 one time, and Dropbox was like $3 or whatever, and then all of a sudden the corporate jumped way up, but it jumped up. Oh, Yammer was the other one, right? Microsoft bought. It jumps up because they're trying to go into the corporate space. So that kind of freemium is very interesting.
On all of this, I'm trying to get questions ready on deck, but really I just want to kind of sit and soak up your answers. You talk in your book about I love all the psychology behind all this pricing stuff, for one, but you talk about sort of the dangers of offering unlimited pricing and the discount model. Can you share a little about that?
One more time, Carrie?
Are you having a snack right here on office hours?
I was having a snack, and my wife went to tell me that she was leaving, and I was like, too much input. I don't multitask ever.
So we're talking in the book. You talk about sort of the dangers of the unlimited. Actually, yeah, I'm going to break my question into two parts. So first, let's talk about unlimited. Why that's a terrible, terrible.
So, can you hear me? I know you just stuttered over there. Okay. So unlimited is a fancy way of saying Ponzi scheme, right? What happens is I pay you today, and I project that at some point in the future I'm going to ask you a question, but you got your cash today, and then 6 months from now someone else pays you, and yet I show up with a question, and so they're paying, and you're able to fund the answer to me based on what new came in then. When you do that big enough, large enough, long enough, you discover this doesn't work. Like it will not work. And we know that. We know that about Ponzi schemes. We ought to know that about unlimited everything. The reality is, in the WordPress ecosystem, you could get away with giving someone 149 licenses and that is the equivalent to unlimited, right? Because it's only 149. I mean, there's a stop, and you can do the math on that, right? You just have to know, and you have to do the analysis, and that's where what I discover is that most service and product people in the space just don't do enough data collection, and they don't do enough analysis, right? I asked at one point several people who made plugins and themes. I just said, can you tell me how much time you spent to build this? And explicitly, can you tell me how much time you spent building the first pass, how much you spent on support, how much you spent on new features to keep it current, and how much you spent on new offshoots based on the market that you were getting? And 9 out of 10 people I talked to were like, I can't tell you any of that, right? They could tell me one number, right, which was elapsed time. I know I started in January and I finished in March. That's the sum total of what they could tell me. Now imagine if you're a restaurant and that's all you know about the food that you serve, right? You wouldn't be able to do anything, right? Because you couldn't figure out which were your most valuable deals and which one were horrible things on the menu that you never wanted to sell. And yet in a restaurant, and especially on a menu, there are what they call stars, plow horses, puzzlers, and dogs on every menu, right? The stars are the most profitable meals, and the plow horses do well. The puzzlers are ones that you're like, I'm not sure why people buy these things, and then the dogs are horrible, right? They're expensive for you, and they don't sell well. But you know what you discover on a menu is that they break up the food by different sections, and so you have the chicken section, the seafood section. The first item in the list sells the most. And what do you think they put on that? The first item. They put the one that not only will sell them the best, but it will be the most margin, right? Because they know you're going to pick that one, so they're going to make the most margin on that first item. The only way you can do that is to calculate how much something sells and what it costs you to sell it, and the difference is your margin. And if you don't know that, at minimum you don't know that, right? How in the world are you going to be able to adjust how you present or pitch different things, right? So you have to collect data.
Well, I will completely throw myself under the bus as being one of the 9 out of the 10 who couldn't provide good metrics around what the cost and the time of.
I was never gonna out any of the 10.
It's quite all right, but it's live and learn, and I can say without a doubt that I will never release a.
You froze for me.
Did you get that?
Just now you're back. Sorry, you froze.
Oh, okay. Yeah. If I knew that movie Frozen better and could bust out with that song right now, I would, but we'll leave that for later. Wow, I just derailed myself. Crap, I seriously derailed myself. Okay, well, in that case, we'll just... Oh, it's Jackie's question, and it's a good one. It's a zinger, since we're on Genesis Office Hours. Our favorite theme provider, Studio Press, of course, follows that unlimited model. So you can buy a theme or their developer pack, which just is a collection of all their themes, and you can use it on as many sites as you want for ever and ever. Amen. And I assume that if you reach a level of volume, that maybe you can sort of get around the issues that you and I were just talking about with the unlimited plan. But what's your thought on that?
So every time I say unlimited is unsustainable, someone comes back and says, well, Studio Press does it. And Studio Press is fantastic. They're generating tons of revenue. And they're like, everyone wants to grow up and be Studio Press. So, of course, that's the example they're going to highlight. And my response is, Studio Press is part of Copyblogger, and Copyblogger has several revenue streams. So if you have a single revenue stream that is not necessarily profitable, or that doesn't have the same kind of margins that you would hope for a product to be successful, like even Studio Press itself and Genesis, it may be profitable, but its margins may be much, much lower than what you'd want if you were going to run that as its own business. But when it's tucked into a business that has several revenue streams with margins that are much higher, you can level that out and be okay. So you have to look at the bigger picture. It's not just StudioPress on its own. If it was StudioPress on its own, you'd have to go, okay, hold on a second. These people that are also answering questions and all that, how are they getting paid, right? And through what revenue? Because anyone else will tell you, if I sold a theme for $349 and I had to provide all the support for it, and not just one theme, but several themes, and then you could install it on several places, and I just run the support for all of that, all for one price, eventually I'd be like, okay, I need to do something different. So I just think you need to look at StudioPress specifically in the context of a bigger copy blogger. I don't know their business. I don't know their revenue. I don't know their details. So that's as far as I can go. But I do, and I've mentioned that in the comments before, and I've had copy blogger folks come over and go, yeah, A+ on your answer, right? And I'm like, it's just multiple revenue streams. It's a different ballgame.
True, and yeah, I don't really have anything intelligent to add to that because you said it all. So, so Jan says that even though the video quality is terrible today, then it's still better than an Apple live event.
That's good news. Any minute now, we're going to pipe in someone else with a different language talking over me the whole time.
It could be, yeah. We're going to kung fu you. So go ahead, and we've still got Chris either about the is right or in general. Please go ahead and get those in. A question, or maybe just kind of a comment, but are subscriptions going to be, is that sort of the new thing moving forward? Like Adobe Creative Cloud has gone to a subscription-based service as opposed to you don't buy software on a CD off the store Office Depot anymore.
Well, I think we're going to see some challenges with that model, though I think it exists and people are moving toward it. From the business perspective, of course, that's awesome, right? From the business perspective, I get recurring revenue and I can predict it. If I can have predictable recurring revenue, I win every time, right? So by all means, everybody ought to want to go there. But the thing about subscriptions is you open yourself up to incremental regret. Incremental regret is what we've all felt when we joined a gym, right? We signed up our card to pay every month, and we went the first several months. And after that, we didn't go. And the first month we didn't go, we were like, yeah, it's not that bad a deal. I mean, I'm sending them $15 or $25, whatever. It's not the end of the world. But if you don't go for a year, now I know your folks would never do that, but let's just say you knew someone who preferred this couch over going to the gym. So maybe you don't go for a year. Well, at that point, the emotional response to someone who says, you've charged me $25 a month every month for a year, and I've gotten no value from you, right? Then I have an out. Then you're gonna push back big, right? You're gonna be like, I want my return, and they're like, no, we don't give return. Then I'm gonna let everybody in the world know that you are willing to take all this money for doing absolutely nothing. Subscriptions create that incremental regret, and what most people discover is, even though subscriptions are great, membership sites are great, and all that's great, the amount of work you have to do to keep producing value, to keep earning that money, sometimes you'll discover that the new thing you created to add that value has more value than the monthly subscription rate. So imagine you're running a subscription and it says, if you buy this every month, you get access to, my videos or my ebooks, right? And I keep writing books, but I don't sell the books. I put them in the membership, and this way I get recurring revenue. And you're like, this is great. But if I have to write a new book every month for this, if I could just take that book and sell it, I might make more selling it than asking people to subscribe every month. It may be different people who are buying it, but my sum total of revenue may go up per month with a new book each month. So you have to look at that subscription and say, is this really going to be, in the long run, the right plan for me?
Yeah, that in the subscription model, every month you're sorely reminded when the charge comes across on the credit card statement. You're reminded what you're paying for and have that opportunity to evaluate whether or not it is offering, or you are getting some value from it. So, but you do talk about
in all my coaching, I'll put a curb to how long we go. so that everyone can reevaluate, right? Because you never want someone to feel like you're just getting me on the phone so you can take more of my money. Like, no, I don't want your money. I only want your money if I'm delivering the value.
I had a well, maybe it's funny, but that's, it's spam. Don't worry about it. So he emailed me back and he says, that must be why we pay you the big bucks, so you can tell us these things. And he was joking, but my response to him was, the moment my big bucks aren't making you bigger bucks, I hope you fire me. And I said it with, complete conviction, because I don't want to be taking anyone's money and not offering them a value in return. So it's kind of interesting.
Yep.
Great question from Angie. For folks who are just kind of starting to think about value pricing or how they price their services, what 2 actions would you suggest to sort of begin that transition?
The first thing is, and I know this is going to sound like I'm talking about cost plus pricing, which I'm not, but the first thing you have to do is understand your own costs. Understand everything about your costs, and I mean the actual cost of producing something, but also the cost of sale to bring them in. Understand your whole entire funnel. Understand the cost of support on the back end. You have to understand how much you're spending, but also how much value you're delivering across all these different components. Most people undercut their price undercuts their costs already, right? The biggest mistake you're making already is that you said it's worth $2,000, and the only thing you calculated on a $2,000 project was from the first day you started coding until the last day you coded, and you didn't get paid for any of the pre-sale education, you didn't get paid for any of the post-sale support, you didn't get paid for anything. So you're giving more value than you're worth right there, than you're charging, because you haven't even looked at your costs. So the first thing is to understand your world, and that means capturing a bunch of data. The second thing is understanding your target's world, right? What are they paying you for? I tell people a lot, the person who pays $500 or $1,000 for a website, they're not paying you $500 to get a website. They're paying you $500 to get your phone number or to get your email, because then you become the person that fixes their network, the person who fixes Outlook, the person who fixes their website, the person that their brother calls when the TV doesn't work with the remote. You become that tech person for them for $500, right? And that's the trade-off, and you don't want to do that, right? You want to make sure that you understand your market, and when you understand your market and you understand what they're really paying for, you can price appropriately. So I would say those 2 things, and I use the term when we're talking about understanding your customers, I use the term marinating in the problem space because it's a visual picture of how long it takes to spend in that space to really capture the fullness of what's going on out there. We often get really caught up in just we're commoditizing ourselves, right? And so we just kind of keep discounting and shrinking the box, saying I'll deliver this and that. Most people, if they're buying a website, they're not buying a website. They're buying a web presence. They're buying leads. So you want to think through what do they want out of this? Your customer isn't your customer. It's your customer's customers, right? So you want to think through what are they needing and how do I deliver value to them? Because if I deliver value to them, then my customer is going to be thrilled. But that means if your customer is building a real estate website that gets leads, leads are the driving indicator. And what's a lead worth in that space? And how can you push their leads from whatever it is up 30%? That's massive value, right? And the trade-off you make on charging for that will be a lot easier than when you start saying, here's my flat fee. But you have to know their space, because if you were thinking in that world of every lead is worth tens of thousands of dollars, and then you go to selling an ebook where every lead is worth, $4, it's a very different ball game. So understand your clients, understand your clients' clients, understand that space so that you can start assessing value.
That's perfect. I feel like we should just drop the mic in the broadcast right there. I love you, Chris.
Well, if you ended the broadcast right there, you wouldn't be able to tell them that while the book is predominantly about product pricing, it's actually an introduction to product pricing, that I wrote about a whole bunch of experiments and reference them in a PowerPoint that I posted on my site today, so that if people want to talk more about pricing, it was there. And I recorded a special service-oriented pricing clip that I sent you and that you have available for them, right?
I do. And your Chris Lima Gold specific to pricing your services, then go to carriedeals.com/Lima, L-E-M-A. And I was going to do like Lima Rocks / Lima is Amazeballs, but I didn't want it to get too long. So it's just carriedeals.com/Lima, and you can get access to that video. And just, by the way, if anybody wants to, Chris wasn't trying to get me to tell you people to call him later, but you can go to Clarity FM and actually schedule one-on-one time with Chris if you want to ever get his take on or feedback on your specific situation. We're about to have to wrap up because we're on the top of the hour, but Chris, thank you so much. Every time I have a conversation with you, which if people look at which WordCamps Chris is speaking at and go just to say hi to him in the hallway, but always glean some great wisdom from you, and I appreciate your sharing it with the Genesis Office Hours audience. Was that too much fawning? Was that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
And offers a tremendous value of just keeping your clients' sites up to date, malware free, all that good stuff. So be sure and check that out. All right, so a couple of housekeeping items. I hate even saying that because that sounds like it's boring, but it's not boring. A couple of exciting action points for you after we end the podcast today. If you would like to see another episode of Genesis Office Hours Book Club, please go to carriedeals.com/GOH, find today's episode, and just leave a comment with which book you would be interested to see in the future. And then also don't forget to go to carriedeals.com/Lima to watch more Chris Lima goodness. Chris, when will people see you at a next WordCamp?
Let's see. I'm speaking at WordCamp San Francisco. And I'm also speaking at Woo Conference, in case anyone's doing WooCommerce stuff. I'm speaking at Tampa, unfortunately, it's the same weekend you're doing Dallas-Fort Worth. But I'm speaking at Tampa, and then 2 weeks later, I think I'm speaking in Baltimore. And there's an outside chance I haven't heard back that I may speak in Vegas. So those are I think those are the final 5 places this year that you can see me.
Well, there's
I'd love to meet you, so come on by.
Left. What's that?
I said I'd love to meet folks, so have them come on by.
Sweet. Well, thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for tuning in and asking your awesome questions over on Twitter. And don't forget, if you read Chris's book or if you're going to pick up later, be sure to head over to Amazon and leave a fantastic review for him. All right, guys, we will see you in a week.